This time, instead of clearing her brain, the wild, intoxicating vampire blood was making her more confused, more heavy and sleepy. James? It's all right. It's the beginning of the change. Heavy, sleepy, warm, lapped in salty ocean waves. She could almost picture the vampire blood trickling through her veins, conquering everything in its path. It was ancient blood, primeval. It was changing her into something old, something that had been around since the dawn of time, something primitive and basic. Every molecule in her body, changing. Poppy, can you hear me? James was shaking her slightly. Poppy had been so engrossed in the sensations that she hadn't even realized she wasn't drinking anymore. James was cradling her. Poppy. It was an effort to open her eyes. I'm all right. Just sleepy. His arms tightened around her. Then he laid her gently on the mounded pillows. You can rest now. I'll get Phil. But before he went, he kissed her on the forehead. My first kiss, Poppy thought, her eyes drifting shut again. And I'm comatose. Great. She felt the bed give under weight and looked up to see Phil. Phil looked very nervous, sitting gingerly, staring at Poppy. So what's happening now? He asked. The vampire blood's taking over, James said. Poppy said, I'm really sleepy. There was no pain, just a feeling of wanting to glide away. Her body now felt warm and numb, as if she were insulated by a soft, thick aura. Phil, I forgot to say, thank you for helping out and everything. You're a good brother, Phil. You don't have to say that now, Phil said tersely. You can say it later. I'm still going to be here later, you know. But I might not be, Poppy thought. This is all a gamble, and I'd never take it, except that the only alternative was to give up without even trying to fight. I fought, didn't I? At least I fought. Yes, you did, Phil said, his voice trembling. Poppy hadn't been aware she was speaking aloud. You've always been a fighter, Phil said. I've learned so much from you. Which was funny, because she'd learned so much from him, even if most of it was in the last 24 hours. She wanted to tell him that, but there was so much to say, and she was so tired. Her tongue felt thick. Her whole body was weak and languorous. Just hold my hand, she said, and she could hear that her voice was no louder than a breath. Philip took one of her hands, and James the other. That was good. This is the way to do it, with Eeyore and her lying on the pillows beside her, and Phil and James holding her hands, keeping her safe and anchored. One of the candles was scented with vanilla, a warm and homey smell, a smell that reminded her of being a kid. Vanilla wafers and nap time. That was what this was like. Just a nap in Mrs. Spurgeon's kindergarten, with the sun slanting across the floor and James on a mat beside her. So safe, so serene. Oh, Poppy, Phil whispered. James said, You're doing great, kiddo. Everything's just right. That was what Poppy needed to hear. She let herself fall backward into the music, and it was like falling into a dream, without fear. It was like being a raindrop falling into the ocean that had started you. At the last moment she thought, I'm not ready. But she already knew the answer to that. Nobody was ever ready. But she'd been stupid. She'd forgotten the most important thing. She'd never told James she loved him, not even when he'd said he loved her. She tried to get enough air, enough strength to say it, but it was too late. The outside world was gone, and she couldn't feel her body any longer. She was floating in the darkness and the music, and all she could do now was sleep. sleep, James said, leaning close to Poppy. Don't wake up until I call you. Just sleep. Every muscle in Phil's body was rigid. Poppy looked so peaceful, pale with her hair spread out in coppery curls on the pillow, and her eyelashes black on her cheeks, and her lips parted as she breathed gently. She looked like a porcelain baby doll, but the more peaceful she got, the more terrified Phil felt. I can deal with this, he told himself. I have to. Poppy gave a soft exhalation, and then suddenly she was moving. Her chest heaved once, twice. Her hand tightened on Phil's, and her eyes flew open, but she didn't seem to be seeing anything. She simply looked astonished. Poppy! Phil grabbed at her and getting a handful of flannel nightgown. She was so small and fragile inside it. Poppy! The heaving gasps stopped. For one moment, Poppy was suspended in air. Then her eyes closed, and she fell back on the pillows. Her hand was limp in Phil's. Phil lost all rationality. Poppy, he said, hearing the dangerous, unbalanced tone in his own voice. Poppy, come on. Poppy, wake up. On a rising tone. His hands were shaking violently, scrabbling at Poppy's shoulders. Other hands pushed his away. What the hell are you doing? James said quietly. Poppy? Poppy! Phil kept staring at her. Her chest wasn't moving. Her face had a look of innocent release, the kind of newness you only see in babies. And it was changing, taking on a white, transparent look. It was uncanny, ghost-like, and even though Phil had never seen a corpse, he knew instinctively that this was the death pallor. Poppy's essence had left her. Her body was flat and toneless, no longer inflated by the vital spirit. Her hand in Phil's was slack, not like the hand of a sleeping person. Her skin had lost its shine, as if someone had breathed on it softly. Phil threw back his head and let out an animal sound. It wasn't human. It was a howl. You killed her! He tumbled off the bed and lurched toward James. You said she was just going to sleep, but you killed her! She's dead! James didn't back away from the attack. Instead, he grabbed Phil and dragged him out into the hallway. Hearing is the last sense to go, he snarled in Philip's ear. She may be able to hear you. Phil wrenched free and ran toward the living room. He didn't know what he was doing. He only knew that he needed to destroy things. Poppy was dead. She was gone. He grabbed the couch and flipped it over, then kicked the coffee table over too. He snatched up a lamp and yanked its cord out of the socket and threw it toward the fireplace. Stop it! James shouted over the crash. Phil saw him and ran at him. The sheer force of his charge knocked James backward into the wall. They fell to the floor together in a heap. You killed her! Phil gasped, trying to get his hands around James's throat. Silver. James's eyes blazed like the molten metal. He grabbed Phil's wrists in a painful grip. Stop it now, Philip, he hissed. Something about the way he said it made Phil stop. Almost sobbing, he struggled to get air into his lungs. I'll kill you if I have to keep Poppy safe, James said, his voice still savage and menacing. And she's only safe if you stop this and do exactly what I tell you to do. Exactly what I tell you. Understand? He shook Phil hard, nearly banging Phil's head into the wall.